You bet.
We're going to focus on national security. New Customs and Border Protection data revealed nearly 9,000 illegal migrants from 73 different countries crossed the San Diego border in just 1 week. Yes, 9,000 in just a week. As CBP Customs and Border Protection sources telling Fox News exclusively, migrant encounters have already exceeded 1 million for this fiscal year, and that fiscal year began in October. Joining me right now from the Texas Department of Public Safety is Lieutenant Christopher Olivarez. Lieutenant, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being here. And thank you for all that you're doing at the border. Can you tell us what you're seeing? What are the most important trends we should understand about the southern border today?
Well, good morning, Maria. Thanks for having me on. So, of course, a lot has transpired in the last several months, of course, especially here in Texas. We've seen a significant drop in illegal border crosses in Texas, and it's all in part because of what our state troopers are doing, and, of course, what Governor Abbott is doing through Operation Lone Star by fortifying areas along the river with physical barriers. We saw the challenges that we were facing in Texas, legal battles from the federal government trying to stop us by cutting wire and wanting us to remove barriers. But, of course, Governor Abbott simply was not going to stand for that, and we continue to hold the line. And because of that, we're seeing a shift in illegal border crossings in areas such as Arizona. You mentioned San Diego. I mean, they're seeing an influx there from, individuals from all over the globe, China. I mean, they're seeing a significant increase in those type of illegal immigrants in those areas. And it's all because of we're making it more difficult, more challenging to enter the state of Texas. So that's what we're facing right now. But of course, nonetheless, we are still focusing on criminal activity. We're still dealing with human smuggling, drugs that are coming across, criminal gangs, cartel members.
Yeah.
But now it gives us the opportunity for our state troopers to really focus on those threats, the threats to public safety and national security.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically proof that borders work, that protection at the border works. You all put up that fencing, and now border crossings are down. But where are they going? Is the activity shifting to San Diego, to Arizona, as those numbers obviously are rising? So what's happening in terms of, they're not going back to Venezuela, they're not going back to Honduras, right?
No, of course not. They're not going to go back. I mean, especially when they make this journey, thousands of miles from their country, they're going to make their way into the country somehow, whether it's through Texas, Arizona, or San Diego. But one thing that you mentioned, of course, what we've been doing in Texas for the last 3 years, I mean, we didn't create any laws. We don't need to have any type of negotiation to secure a border. We simply follow the rule of law, and we enforce laws in Texas. And, of course, it all goes back to having strong, decisive leadership in Texas, from Governor Abbott to our legislatures, everyone that we have within Texas that's been able to stand and actually, take this fight to the federal government. So that's why when we talk about this border bill that was about to pass, good thing it didn't. There's no need to have negotiations to secure the border. I mean, there's already laws on the books. The problem is that the federal government has failed to enforce those laws, and they reversed every policy that was slowing the flow of illegal immigration. We know that for a fact. And all it takes is executive action to put those policies back in place, and we would not be dealing with this problem right now. But because of what we've been doing, we're seeing that activity shift to Arizona and to San Diego because there is no consequences there. There is no physical barriers there. There's no law enforcement there to actually deter some of that activity.
So, I mean, so the shift now is moving to San Diego and to Arizona, Lieutenant. But you mentioned the Senate security bill and that it failed, of course, yesterday. Even the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, by the way, failed yesterday. You had Republicans voting against it. Tell us what the impact is on Texas.
Well, for a fact, one thing that stood out to me, as far as from an operational perspective, is the fact that they were still going to allow 5,000 illegal immigrants a day. That's 1.8 million a year. That's not including gotaways. That's not including illegal immigrants that would be processed at a port of entry. So we're looking at well over 2 million a year. I cannot comprehend how that would be sustainable for anyone to even think about passing. I mean, you cannot allow thousands to come across the border, and you're codifying illegal behavior, illegal acts by breaking the law. And of course, not only that, Maria, one thing that really stood out to me, the fact is that it's still okay for illegal immigrants to cross a river in order to seek asylum. There was something in that bill to address that issue, to prevent people from entering the river so that they can go to a land port of entry. So I don't understand how that can still become, a normalized situation where you're allowing illegal immigrants to cross a river or to cross the desert to seek asylum. And we've had a record number of illegal immigrant deaths in the last 3 years. So nothing to address border security, nothing to address physical barriers, nothing to address going after cartels or the drugs or fentanyl that's coming across our borders.
Right.
It was going to be a complete disaster, and it was going to have an impact on Texas.
And that was the priority. That was supposed to be the priority. Secure the border. That's all the Republicans kept saying. Secure the border. And yet we've got this huge package that they've got to debate. It's been 1 year since the launch of Operation Lone Star. Governor Greg Abbott, of course, launched it. The Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas National Guard working together to fill in those gaps at the southern border that President Biden refuses to close. The effort led to almost 500,000 illegal migrant apprehensions, almost 40,000 criminal arrests. And we spoke with the governor about it just recently. He was on this program last week. Here's Governor Abbott on that.
You know, Biden says he needs Congress to give him the power to do whatever he needs to do to secure the border. The fact is, as we all saw from what President Trump did, the President of the United States has the power. I must emphasize this. There is an obligation, there are laws in the United States that require the President to deny illegal entry of any illegal immigrant. And then if they do get into the United States, he has a legal obligation to detain those illegal immigrants. Joe Biden is failing at both of those duties. And that's exactly what gives Texas the authority to make sure that we can step up and secure our own border and protect our own state through self-defense.
Yeah, and Lieutenant, that's what you're doing. I guess the word was that, yes, the Supreme Court said that the federal government does have the ability to take down that wire fencing that we're looking at behind you, but they're probably not going to do it. Is that how you see it?
Right, Maria. So as far as the agents, Border Patrol agents at the ground level, we still have a great relationship with them. They are not looking to interfere with our operations. And I can tell you one thing is that if they did cut the wire, we would put more wire and make it more difficult. So that's not going to change. It's not going to stop us from what we're doing. And the governor is right on point with what he said. Federal government has the obligation to protect the country, to protect fellow Americans, but they refuse to do that. And that's why Governor Abbott stepped up for the last 3 years.
Absolutely.
And now going into year 4 with Operation Lone Star to not only to protect Texas, but protect the nation.
Yeah, Lieutenant, let me get your take on who's coming in, even though I know that in that one area with the fencing, the crossings have stopped or slowed down quite a bit. But we talk all the time about the Chinese nationals coming in, 28,000 at the end of last year, and whether or not they're being directed by Xi Jinping. What's the makeup of that group? Are they largely military-aged men? What else are you seeing at the border in terms of who's coming and how much they're paying? They're paying the drug cartels to get here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, that's been a significant change and uptick as far as Chinese nationals that have been entering the border. We saw a significant increase in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas last year. But, of course, that activity shift, and it's all based on the cartels that control the flow in Mexico. The Sinaloa cartel, which operates on the farther and western part of the border, which in Arizona, San Diego. I mean, you're talking about Chinese nationals that are paying $35,000 to $50,000 a person to get across the border. That is big money for these cartels when they deal with these special interest aliens from these countries. So, of course, they want that flow. They want those individuals to cross through those areas where there's less law enforcement, less consequences, no deterrence. It makes it a lot easier. And not knowing who these individuals are, single-age men, I mean, you have no idea what their intent is. There's no data that's shared from China with the United States, so we don't know what the backgrounds are in some of these individuals and what their intent is once they're in the country. And, of course, it's going to have a detrimental impact in the near future, especially when we allow so many individuals across the globe to enter the country unvetted.
Unbelievable. Christopher Olivarez, thank you very much, Lieutenant, and thanks for all of your work.